How many of you guys are wondering why the Salt Lake is here? Any of you guys wondering why the Salt Lake is here? Emily, what does this salt lake? What does this Salt Lake do for us? Make you thirsty. How many of you have ever licked a salt lick? Okay. This one, the big one here, I borrowed from Bucky. But how many of you have ever gone out in a pasture and licked a salt lick? Why did we do that? Out of curiosity. This one here, I want you to know, has been licked by my grandkids. I got it yesterday, and my dog. And so, just to give you a little bit of a history, this is a salt lick. Okay? And my daughter bought this for me because I said, I need you to give me a salt lick. So, she's licking it. She says, here, Liam, lick it. So Liam takes this whole side here and licks up the whole side. And Amory was a little bit more resentful. She licked up this side. And my daughter, I don't know where she licked, but anyhow. And then she starts reading the directions on it. Not for human consumption. Keep out of reach of children. And here she had just given this to her kids, and they licked it. Why? Because what does it do, Roger? It makes you thirsty. How many of you guys remember last week we were talking about the Beatitudes? And sometimes we have to have an attitude for Christ, not the other way, in order to do the things that we're working on. So today we're going to be looking in Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to be talking about that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. So this salt lick, it creates a thirst. And the big one, it does the same purpose. Except that one weighs 55 pounds, and this one weighs 4 pounds. But is salt important to us in our diet? Okay, so now we're going to take a look at scriptures and see what it says about being the salt of the earth. And you guys might ask the question, what's so important about when Christ told us to be the salt of the earth? I could understand the light, but why do we have to be the salt of the earth? How many of you guys have ever wondered why Christ told us to be the salt of the earth? How many of you have taken salt and poured on snails and slugs just to watch them kind of... You've done that, huh, Cameron? And how does that make you feel when you do it? It feels good, doesn't it? Those little escargots, you put a little salt on them. And it transforms that snail or that slug. It really does. But when Christ told us to be the salt of the earth in Matthew chapter 5, we're going to take a look at the significance of what salt was during this time period, and we will be able to understand why he said that we need to be the salt of the earth. So beginning in verse 13, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under the foot of men. And then in verse 14 it says, you are the light of the world. A city set on the hill cannot be hidden. Nor does anyone who lights a light or lamp put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, that it may give light to all that are in the house. So we can understand the importance of the light. But when he talks about us being the salt of the earth, how many of you guys really grasp what it's saying? Okay, so if we're the salt of the earth, let's just kind of imagine that salt in the Bible was used as an offering before God. In the Old Testament, it says, whenever you have an offering, season it with salt. Wow! So here we have the importance of an offering going before God as the salt of the earth. He says, I want you to become the salt of the earth. He says, I want you to have an offering always of praise to God. That's really what he's saying. But what about salt? Salt was divine. Each of you guys get a little salt shaker today on the way out, because I already got expense to hand them out. And my granddaughter helped me pour the salt in all these, because we got them from Amazon, and they came in on Friday, so she helped me fill up all the salt. And you guys would be happy to know that all the salt that is in the little containers all came out of the same container. And she helped me pour it in there, and she put the little pieces of paper on the top, or the plastic, so that the salt wouldn't come out. And this one she missed. But did you know salt was divine? And did you know that people believe that salt drives out demonic forces? Especially during this time period in the Bible. They believed that salt would keep back the demonic forces. And that is why you will never see somebody that is on the dark side with salt in their house. A witch will never have salt in her house. Because they still believe that salt drives out demonic forces. So when we're called to be the salt of the earth, we're called to be an offering before God, first of all. And we're called to take that salt, and if it does drive out demonic forces, aren't we as Christians supposed to drive out the forces of evil? Well, what about salt during this time period represented hospitality? Have you ever thought of that? That during this time period when he says, you are called to be the salt of the earth, that the salt represented hospitality. And he's saying, you as Christians, remember he had just pulled the disciples aside and he says, I want you to know that you are going to go through things, but you can be blessed in everything that you go through. And he says, you are called to be the salt of the earth. In other words, you are called to have a purpose in your life to bring flavor to other people. And in this hospitality that is going on, aren't Christians supposed to be the most hospitable people around? So he's called us to be hospitable. And salt lick, as we were talking about, it creates a thirst. You guys ever wonder why when you go to Texas Roadhouse they have all those peanuts there? The salted peanuts, or Logan's Roadhouse. Why do they have those peanuts there? Why is it that the guys, when they go to a bar, eat pretzels? Because it creates a thirst, so they drink more. They give you the free pretzels and hoping that you drink more. Is that true? I've never drank in a bar. I went to a bar once in my life to cash a check, but that's another story. And I was always worried about somebody seeing me coming out of there. Oh, we saw Dave coming out of the bar. Well, that was back before we had 24-hour banking, and that was back before we had debit cards, and that was back, and I was leaving town. I needed to cash my check, and the only place that would do it was the bar. And that's when I was in the military, and they were hoping that those military guys would go in and cash their check and drink with the salted pretzels that they had. Did you know that if we had no salt in our diet, it would lead to death? Had you guys ever thought about that? It leads to a graveyard. That's true. And within 1 month, if you don't have salt in your diet, you'll die an agonizing death. Wow. And he's called us to be the salt of the earth. Did you know that the sodium itself regulates the passage of the nutrients into the cells? Wow. And with it, nutrients can enter into your cells And it will have, if you don't have enough, it can cause malnutrition in you. So when he calls us to be the salt of the earth, our life without the creator of the universe, without God, is going to lead to malnutrition in our life. And it's going to dry us up. But we're called to be the salt of the earth. Cattle ranchers. Going back to Roger. Roger says that he puts the salt out there to keep his cows healthy. My daughter and grandson and my daughter lick this. If you guys want to lick it, we can pass it around. It's full of nutrients. It's full of all those things. It's going to create a thirst. And this actually has minerals in it, so it's good for you. Minus the fact that whenever you read it, it says, do not give to children to lick, and parents do not set the example. That's really what it's saying. But cattle ranchers will use a salt lick to keep their cows healthy. Did you know that the cows, if they don't have enough salt in their diet, they begin to starve? Malnutrition sets in. Did you know that if they don't have enough salt in their diet, that their milk is not any good? And so we're called to be the salt of the earth. And Roger, if your cows want this after my kids have licked it, I'll give it to you. Because I don't have any need for it. But we've all, well, I shouldn't say us all. I should say a number of you guys, when I asked how many have licked a salt lick, raised your hand. I'll never forget the first time that I licked a salt lick. I was with my dad, and we were out. And there was cows out there. My dad said, David, he says, come here, I want you to try something. He said, lick that. I said, Dad, and the cows had already licked it. I mean, it was out in the field. It wasn't a brand new one. And my dad says, David, this is a salt lick. You ought to lick it and see how it tastes. So I get down on my belly and I lick that salt lick. Because my dad told me to. But it created a thirst. And if we're to be the salt of the earth, aren't we supposed to create a thirst for righteousness? Well, the salt covenant. Did you know that salt was so important in biblical times? That the salt itself was more valuable than a lot of other things. Chance and Grace, when they got married, we had the salt covenant in their wedding. You remember that, Spence, right? You were there. Salt poured together. But it's God's covenant. God's a covenant-making God. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 13 and verse 5, it says, do you not know that the Lord your God of Israel gave dominion over Israel to David forever, and to him his sons by a covenant of salt? In other words, God says, I want you to know that salt is important to what we do in our life. And the covenant that they made, it was a legal contract. Because see, the truth is, if I could separate and I poured these grains of salt into each other, and I could separate this grains from this grains, once they were mixed together, that contract would become broken. If I was to take this salt and pour it together and mix it up, can I separate the same grains that were in this one and that one? No. So salt was a binding legal contract. And God himself created that covenant. He says, I want you to know, he says, because of that, he says, I want you to have the salt that is now a hunger for righteousness. He says, I want you to hunger and thirst after that. It's an everlasting covenant because it cannot be broken, because I cannot separate those grains of sand or salt once I poured it in somebody else's. And so here's what would happen is you would carry around a salt package with you These are small enough you guys can take in your lunchbox so that whenever you're eating your boiled eggs, you have a little salt for them. I tried to find those. Some of you guys remember those little salt containers that Leslie Salt used to make. You know, they were the little itty-bitty ones. I was raised in Fremont, and we had the salt ponds there. And the salt during its different stage of harvest, when they would bring it in, they would put train tracks out on the salt. And because of the different consistency of the salt at Leslie Salt, you could go out there and you could see the different colors of that salt. It was still salt. But it was just in different stages of what we're going through. And so God says, I want you to know that first of all, I want you to be the salt of the earth because I am a covenant God, and what I told you is a promise and it's everlasting. Jesus said in Mark chapter 9, verses 49 through 50, for everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt becomes unsalty with what you make it, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourself and be at peace with one another. And in Matthew 13 it says, you're the salt of the earth. We are a living testimony to what God's done for us in our life. And so when he's telling the disciples, he says, I want you to be the salt of the earth. It is important that we understand the history of how important it was to those disciples at that time. They recognized that it was a covenant. They recognized that it was eternal. They recognized all those things. And the Old Testament, as I said, it said, let all of your offerings be seasoned with salt. Salt is an important ingredient in life. Let's think of some of the natural causes for salt. It can endure extreme heat. This salt lick here is not going to break down unless if I throw it down on the ground. It's going to stick together. So salt is able to endure extreme heat. Salt can be used to melt the coldest ice. Did you know that salt will make your water colder? How many of you guys have ever froze homemade ice cream? Yeah, froze homemade ice cream. Made homemade ice cream. What do we put on the outside of that? Rock salt. Why? Because it makes it really, really cold. Bucky, when you guys go hunting, do you take salt, put in your ice chest to keep your meat to a point that it still stays fresh?
I don't think so. You're just high up in the cold.
So you're so high up that it stays cold anyway. But did you know that if you wanted to cool something down really fast, you could take salt and mix it in with your ice or in with your water and it will make it really cold? Did you know that salt is also a medicine? It purifies us. You guys remember canker sores when you were growing up? How many of you ever drink salt water to help with those canker sores? So salt is able to endure extreme heat. It can melt the coldest water. Any of you guys have water purifiers at your house? What do we use to purify the water? Salt. How many of you like beef jerky? Or venison jerky? Or alligator jerky? Or any of those meats? How do we get that jerky that way? It's because of the what? The salt. Sandy and Vicky, when your dad had the meat locker, Marcel, when Bill had the meat locker, didn't you guys hang the meat with salt? Why was that? It was to do what? Add preservation to that. So salt in itself is a preservative. It can preserve things. So he's calling the disciples. He says, I want you to preserve the gospel message that is here. He says, I want you to take the gospel message, and I want you to be able to preserve what's going on. Talking about Sunday school this morning in Galatians, if you missed it this morning, you'll have to ask Kathy for a rerun. But in Galatians, Paul was talking about the false doctrines that were out there. And Christ has called his disciples and says, I want you to have a purity of heart. He says, I want you to go out into the world with the salt, and I want you to be able to soften the hardest heart. He says, I want you to know that that salt is going to be able to endure extreme pressure and temperatures. And as a Christian, we're going to go through things in our life that we need to be able to endure. Salt purifies. How many of you, before you ever taste anything, go to a restaurant and what's the first thing you grab?
Pepper.
The pepper. How many of you grab the salt shaker before you ever taste anything? And start salting it down. See, salt adds a little flavor to our life. So he's called the disciples and he says, I want you to be the salt of the earth. He says, I want you to go out into the world. And he says, I want you to add flavor to those that you come in contact with. Did you know that salt keeps your coffee from going bitter? If you have one of those big things of coffee, like the 30, 60 cups or 12 cups, or, it doesn't really matter. But when I was in the Navy, we used to take a pinch or two of salt in the big 30-cup urns, or 60 cups, whatever we had. And we'd put a dash of salt in there after the coffee was brewed. We would dump the grounds. Because what did it do? It kept the coffee from going bitter. How many of you knew that? Did you know that salt also is a cleaning agent? We could use salt to clean. So God has called us and he says, I want you to know that salt in itself can do all these amazing things. Salt is cohesive. It sticks together. He says, you guys are going out in the world. He says, I want you to know that because you're the salt of the world. He says, salt is cohesive. And he says, you can stick together. Because of who? Because of Jesus Christ. He says, salt is cohesive. And did you know that during this time period, salt was used as a bond of friendship? Did you know that it was also used if you had an enemy and you made amends with your enemy? You would come into their house and you would take a bowl of salt and you would both lick your finger and run it in the salt, showing that it was taken care of because you were going to stick together. So the disciples, when they're told to be the salt of the earth, oh, wait a minute. That's what he was talking about. And Roger, you said salt and cows produces what? Thirst. If we are the salt of the earth, and if we're out in the world, and we're living the way that God wants us to live, would we, by sprinkling our salt on somebody, create a thirst for Jesus? And he says, I want you to know that there's a certain thirst that comes with that, a thirst for righteousness. We're going to be in the world, but we shouldn't be a part of the world. And see, the salt that he was talking about created a spiritual thirst. They would carry their little things of salt around. And so what would happen is this salt, say if Jeff over here had his salt and I had my salt, and I said, Jeff, how much will you sell me that piece of property for? And we come to an agreement on the price. Then what we would do is we would mix our salts together, symbolizing that that contract was a legal binding contract for eternity. Wow. And so when he calls us to be the salt of the earth, he's called us to not only do that, but He's called us to come in and have a thirst for righteousness. And in this covenant that He said, I want you to know that you carry your salt with you. And whenever you come across somebody, and if there's hard feelings between that person and this person, then what you do is you take your salt. And you take your salt and you mix it together. And when you mix the salt together, it calls for a truce. Because why? You're taking your finger and you're licking the salt and you're thirsting for righteousness. I'm still going to have to hand them out. I just had 8 up here that I need to get rid of. So we have the salt. And it's called for us to come in. And it was to be shared as a truce between enemies. Did you know that salt cannot be ruined unless it's chemically altered? Wow. We're going to be in the world, but we don't have to be of the world. We're going to have the influence of what's going on, but we don't have to have that. The salt crystal is an enduring mineral. Depending upon where you are, they actually mine salt. When I was in the Caribbean, over in Jamaica, we had been working in my hands. We were handing off the cement in buckets. And my hands were kind of really bad. And Rod Jameson, the pastor over in Lemoore, said my hands should be healed, and grabbed him, and I wanted to punch him in the nose. No, not really, but it hurt. But when we were out in the Caribbean, the salt from the Caribbean, because of how it was, brought healing to my hands. And he says, you are the salt of the earth. He says, I want you to carry your salt with you. And see, we can take the salt that we have and we can pour it in. And here's 4 more salts. We can take the salt and we can pour it into water. But guess what happens when we pour the salt into the water? Is it still salt? It doesn't dissolve. So the salt in itself doesn't dissolve. So as we take the salt, and he says to his disciples, I want you to be the salt of the earth. He says, you're going to go through things in your life, but I want you to know that we can stick together and that salt's still not going to dissolve. He said it's still going to have the properties of the salt itself. Wow. So when he calls his disciples to be the salt of the earth, does it have a different meaning on us now? After taking a look at some of the properties of salt. And then he says, I want you to go out in the world. And he says, be the light of the world. In other words, take what we have and share the good news of Jesus Christ with the rest of the world. Like I said, we could understand when he told his disciples, I want you to be the light of the world. But salt? Why would I want to be salt to somebody? Did you know that salt, if you get it in a wound, it burns? That may not be a bad thing. Is that a good thing?
But it heals it.
It does what?
It heals it.
It heals it. So when he calls us to be the salt of the earth, as Christians, we're going to run into people that are impacted, that are hurt, that need a little bit of flavor in their life, that need to be stuck together in a cohesive effect, that it's not going to be broken down. And in verse 16 it says, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify the Father who is in heaven. And in verse 17 it says, do not think that I came to abolish the law of the prophets. For I did not come to abolish but to fulfill. So in what he's telling his disciples, he says, I want you to know that the salt of the earth is important. It's important important for you and I to have salt in our diets. Sometimes we can have just too much salt. My sister made cookies one time, and it called for, well, she misread it. And instead of a teaspoon of salt, oh, let's just say she put a cup or so in there, and they were pretty salty. My dad wouldn't even eat them because they had too much salt. But just the right amount of salt in our life. No, don't look at me like that. My sister made those cookies last week. She was probably 7 or 8 years old when she did that. But they were pretty salty cookies, and we threw them away. Too much salt can spoil a thing, but just the right amount of salt in our life can impact the world. We're going to get ready to close with prayer, and Spence is going to help me out. And he's going to give you guys a salt shaker on the way out. As you guys stand with me, Spence is going to hand you a salt shaker after we close with prayer. But what I want you to do is remember what salt can do for you. Remember what light can do for you. It brings warmth. It brings comfort. Light brings healing. But He's called us to be the salt of the earth. Lord, I thank you for who you are. Lord, I ask that you help us to be the salt of the earth. Lord, I add flavor to people's life with just the right amount of salt in their life. Lord, as Joyce said even this morning, Lord, that she's not going to pester them or do any of that, but God, she's going to sprinkle a little salt every once in a while upon their lives. Lord, I ask that as we take just a little container of salt, it's real salt. Lord, it all came from the same container. But God, help us to remember that a little salt in our life, a little salt in our Christian life can change the world. Lord, help us to have the right amount of salt and the right amount of light as we go out into the world. Father, I just thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.